US lawmakers and regulators have a tough job. Their sole focus and job is to keep the US dollar as the reserve currency and the superpower of the world, so they use the money printer to gain influence. And they've weaponized the dollar to break the will of any country that doesn't fall in line. But regulations don't always gain the desired outcome. In fact, the outcomes can be quite different than the outcomes lawmakers intended, which is exactly what happened with the two big announcements that just happened over the last week. So let me explain. Hey everyone, Mark here. So let me explain with a short story, which is known to economists as the Cobra problem. Now, why Cobra problems? Well, if we go back to colonial India, they suffered from too many cobras, which was a problem very clearly in need of a solution. Of course, the government regulators rushed in to save the day. Their solution was to cut the number of cobras in the city, which of course sounds sensible, right? And to do this, they placed a bounty on them. Now, like I said, this is a perfectly reasonable solution to the problem. The bounty was generous, which got lots of people interested and involved into this new cobra hunting. And just as intended, it worked. The cobra population decreased, and that's where things got interesting. As the cobra populations fell and it became harder to find the cobras in the wild, people became rather, shall we say, entrepreneurial, and they started to raise cobras, which then they would kill to then go collect the bounties on. But when the government realized that there weren't many cobras left in that city, but they were still paying the same amount of bounties, the government did what they thought was reasonable, which was to cancel the program. They decided they weren't going to pay for the cobras anymore, and guess what happened? All the people that were raising cobras in their homes did what they thought was reasonable, which was to release all their cobras, because of course, who wants those things living in their house, right? In the end, India ended up with a bigger cobra problem after the bounty ended than it had before it began. And these are the unintended consequences of the Cobra plan. It was an increase in the number of cobras in the streets, and that's why this is known as the Cobra Effect. All right. Now, when you attempt to solve a problem and it ends up making the problem you're trying to solve worse, this is known as the Cobra Effect, when an attempt to solve a problem ends up making the very problem they are trying to solve worse. So what problems could regulators be making worse today? Well, one of the biggest arguments I hear about Bitcoin is that the government regulators will make it illegal. They'll ban it, right? Now, most know that no government can shut it down. No one can stop Bitcoin, but they could make it illegal, and they could, put you in jail for using it. Now, of course, we know how well that's worked for drugs and, the drug cartels that are worth hundreds of billions of dollars. However, I understand most people probably wouldn't want to own or transact in something that was, contraband or illegal. Now, I've always said that if the US were to make it illegal, then Bitcoin would go live in the free part of the world. And some parts of the world might have been listening. And so to understand what I'm talking about, understand what's happened over the last week, we have to jump back in time. Not that far. We'll just go back about a year ago. And about a year ago, a little more than a year ago, a House Financial Services Committee member, Rep. Brad Sherman from California, we don't want to accept him, but he's here. He went before Congress to talk about the Facebook currency Libra at the time. And he was talking about Libra. He was talking about cryptocurrencies in general. And of course, he was talking about Bitcoin. And he warned Congress that these new types of assets have the potential to threaten the US dollar's dominance over the global financial system. He went on to say that, quote, cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin are a direct attack on the US dollar's role in the global economy, and that it could achieve its objectives to, quote, again, displace the US dollar or interfere with the US dollar being virtually the sole reserve currency in the world. Now, he covered multiple benefits of the US dollar dominance and other currencies, including, quote, the ability to influence other countries' policies and actions through the use of economic sanctions. All right, so what he's saying is that the U.S. having the dollar and being the reserve currency of the world is able to weaponize the dollar and use it to force its will and its way on other countries. Now, if a country does something the U.S. doesn't like, sanctions. You don't like it? Sanctions. And they just sanction everybody, basically kicking them out of the financial system. Well, one of the countries that's been hit extremely hard with sanctions is Iran. Now, just last week, after the US Treasury Department placed new sanctions on them, they decided to make a big move. They decided to use Bitcoin to to fund imports. Now, the Islamic Republic has become the very first country in the world to adopt Bitcoin at a state level for value exchange. Now, Iran is somewhat desperate as they've seen annual inflation of about 35% since 2018, which is pretty drastic. Not the worst not the worst country in the world, but pretty bad. And the value of their currency, the Rial, has started to fall dramatically. Now, the country is subsidizing Bitcoin mining on their government energy sources with the rule that all Bitcoin miners must sell their Bitcoin to the government. Now, this is a similar plan that China's had in place for like over the last decade, where China allowed companies from all over the world to come and mine for gold in China. But all the gold mined had to be sold back to China. And so things are kind of the same way in Iran, but now instead of gold, it's Bitcoin that can be mined there and has to be sold back. And now things are starting to move really, really fast. Like I said, this was just last week, the news of Iran adopting Bitcoin. And then in just a week, we already have another country that decided to join their ranks. Today, that announcement is Venezuela. And they announced that they're going to incorporate Bitcoin to its Patriot crypto remittance platform. And this will enable Venezuelan citizens to formally receive remittances in cryptocurrency form. So remittances are when you send money from one country to the next. It's a really, really, really big piece, especially in Venezuela. And so they're going to allow people to do that in cryptocurrency in Bitcoin. Now, many citizens in Venezuela that have been hit really hard from hyperinflation, they already use Bitcoin. And they use Bitcoin as a store of value, right? Their dollars losing value so fast, they're using Bitcoin to store their value. Of course, they also use it for these cross-border remittances, these payments as well. And now the formal incorporation of Bitcoin into the national remittances system is going to continue to boost the use of cryptos by these Venezuelans. Now, the Venezuelan government is also following Iran by formally recognizing and endorsing Bitcoin mining. All right. Now, look, I'm not here to say that either of these countries are shining examples of freedom and human rights. Okay. They're certainly not. Now, I wouldn't want to live under either of these countries' totalitarian regimes. So, don't get fixated on the who is doing this, but rather focus on the what, right? We're focusing on the trend because this is going to sweep through the world really, really fast. You see, there's about 195 different countries in the world. And the US is the only one country in the world that can print an unlimited amount of dollars at their will. The other 194 countries, they got to deal with the consequences of that, right? They also have to bend at the will of the US government because of the weaponized dollars and the ongoing threats of sanctions against it, right? So what I believe we're going to see is we'll start to see more and more countries move to adopt Bitcoin as a reserve asset and a medium of exchange for global trade. And these early adopters nations, they're going to see their balance sheets go up from holding Bitcoin, while the value of the US reserves are going down and down and down. We know the US reserves are going down because it's done by design. Inflation causes the value to go down and Bitcoin goes up. And as that happens one by one, more nations will move their balance sheets over to Bitcoin. Now, the nations that continue to hold on to their fiat, they're going to fall further and further behind. And then as the US tries to stay afloat by printing more and more dollars, it's only going to accelerate the transition. None of the countries wanted to be first, but Iran made the first move because they had the greatest need. And within a week, we already have the second country. So it's going to happen fast. None of them want to be the last country to make this move. Now, of course, the US is the only nation out of the 195 with something to lose, with something to protect. So it's going to be the last. The question is, how long does it have before it has no choice? Leave me a comment and let me know what you think. How long does it have before they have no choice? And let me know what you're doing about that as well. As always, give me a thumbs up on this video if you like it. If you don't like the video, give me a thumbs down. It's okay. Either way, just let me know in the comments down below. And that's what I got for you today. To your success. I'm out.